Hello, this is Scott Jentz. Welcome to Sandbox Stories. Hello, and welcome to the Sandbox Story, which is an interview with a longtime friend of mine, Dr. Lou Probst. Hello, Dr. Probst. I'm really glad to have you here.
Glad to be here, Scott.
I've known you for 25 years, give or take. You've been involved in this industry a long time, and you're a tremendous friend to optometry and optometry patients. So I'm just really thrilled that I can tell your story.
Glad to be here.
You were a Canadian by birth. Tell me about the Canadian to American transition in your life.
Well, I still think of myself as a Canadian, but I have to tell you, Scott, after living in the U.S. for 20 years and having a wife that's American and three children who are American, I think it's about time for me to apply. That's on my to-do list, and it's going to happen probably in the next year or two.
Were you brought up in any sort of like rural part of Canada or in a municipal urban area? What was your childhood like?
I'm a city boy. I grew up in Toronto,
Toronto.
the biggest city in Canada by far. And grew up riding public transit and living the city life. So yeah, I was a city boy, and but now I'm kind of the opposite. I'm really not a big fan of big cities. I like the rural kind of laid back country life.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I suppose it's stereotypical to ask, but did you play hockey as a kid?
Scott, I didn't, and it's true that everyone in Canada plays hockey. Like my next door neighbor had a hockey rink in their backyard.
All right.
I had multiple people in my neighborhood actually eventually made it to the NHL. So hockey was huge, but I have weak ankles, and I was the worst skater imaginable. So I quickly realized that there was no hope for me in hockey. So unlike other Canadians, I actually didn't play hockey. Actually, I barely skated at all, and ended up going into swimming, and that's what I focused on for my entire school and college career. I was a swimmer.
So let's go to your educational training. You do med school in Canada, and then you go do your cornea and refractive surgery fellowship at the University of Minnesota. What was the state of refractive surgery then?
Well, it was really in its infantile. I was in medical school. I read about RK, radial keratotomy, and it sounded interesting, but of course it was extremely controversial, and it didn't work all that well. And it was kind of done by a renegade group of ophthalmologists, and most ophthalmologists and optometrists frowned upon it. But then when the excimer laser started to come in, that was during my internship after medical school. And I remember looking at the original papers. They were done by a woman named Marguerite McDonald in New Orleans. And I remember looking at that thinking, this could be it. This could be the thing. But still, I went in ophthalmology and went to my fellowship at the University of Minnesota. And even there, it was not a widespread thing. It was still kind of a little bit fringe, still frowned upon, still kind of considered to be sort of a controversial area. And there were a lot of controversies at the time, including whether it was okay to do bilateral procedures, whether it was okay to co-manage. And you remember back in those days,
Yeah,
Scott. I mean, it sounds crazy now because everything's so established, but back then there were a lot of question marks.
Why did you choose ophthalmology when you left med school as the first area of specialty?
Well, I actually went into medical school thinking I was going to be a plastic surgeon, and that was always my goal. But then, when I got in med school, I went through all the rotations, and the plastic surgeons and the patients struck me as a little odd. It just didn't all seem to make sense to me, and it made me a little uncomfortable. Just maybe it was just a little too um, superficial, I guess you might say. Without, I don't have anything against plastic surgery or plastic surgeons, but for me, I felt I wanted something that I could really understand and sink my teeth into. And when I got to do the ophthalmology rotation, all they were, everything was organized. They had all this fancy equipment. People were coming in, getting their problems solved, leaving. And more so, the ophthalmologists themselves made an impression upon me. They all seemed to have their act together. They all seemed to be dressed well. They all seemed to be confident, and they all seemed to be happy. And that was kind of in contrast to some of the other doctors I met who looked kind of burned out and fried and miserable. So I looked at this group and I looked at what they're doing. And I thought, that's me. That's what I want to do.
I read an article in which you said ophthalmology is a very precise specialty, and you have taken on this precision aspect in your life. How can you describe how ophthalmology is more precise than, say, cardiology, radiology, and such? What's your description of that precision in ophthalmology that almost exceeds others, perhaps?
Well, I don't have much knowledge, frankly, about cardiology, but my wife's a radiologist, so I can speak about that. And radiology certainly, it's a very impressive specialty. Recently, in the last 20 years, it's gone from them sitting in a dark room to now doing a lot of procedures, interacting with patients, and they have a lot of very sophisticated tests. So there's a lot to radiology, but the one way that ophthalmology differs is it's based on very repetitive, very precise procedures because they tend to use precise technology like lasers, diamond knives, or ultrasonic fragmentation in the case of cataracts, or even laser fragmentation of the lens. So there's a lot of very precise equipment. And then because we're doing so many procedures that are usually fairly short in duration, ophthalmology particularly lends itself to doing a lot of procedures, unlike other specialties where, like an orthopedic surgeon, let's say, might do 10 or 12 hip replacements, let's say, in a day, or that would be considered incredible. Whereas in ophthalmology, those kind of numbers are very, very small because of the fact that procedures are so short. I mean, when you're doing things like that and you're doing them over and over again, you tend to get very, very good at them, and you tend to focus on the details because it's all about the details. And so ophthalmology lends itself to that. And the other thing is, and this, of course, being an optometrist, there's no compromising in terms of people's vision. Nobody comes to you saying, I just want to see okay. They want to see well. And if you're going to give them what they want, be it glasses, contacts, or LASIK, they're interested in seeing the best they can, and ideally better than everyone else can see. And that's our job. That's what we got to do. So we got to deliver, and people have a high expectation for what we want to deliver.
I want to ask you about your personal endeavors into triathlons. You started building bikes. Again, it feels like there's this precision aspect that came into that. How did you get into that? And tell us about some of what you've done in triathloning.
Well, it's been a long journey. It started 20 years ago. Mainly, it was a stress reliever.
Yeah.
I started running and then biking, and then my wife said, "You used to be a swimmer." I had put on a lot of weight back then. Actually, that's probably when you first met me, Scott. 25 years ago, when I first started, I was substantially heavier than I am now. I don't know if you remember.
I don't.
No, my belt. My belt size was substantially bigger then. But anyway, I started, exercising, and my wife said, since you're doing these things, why don't you try a triathlon? And I didn't know what I was doing. I was, there's so much to it, and I didn't know much about it. But it kind of intrigued me, and so I sort of got hooked on all the details, and I started working at it. And you work on the running and the running technique, and the swimming I'd already done, but I had to practice open water swimming because I was used to pool swimming. But the cycling in particular is heavily based on the bike you have. Of course, you have to train, and there's a whole these different methods of training and interval training and endurance training. But the technology, the type of bike you have is important. And what I discovered was first, you had to learn how to take care of your bike. So, you had to be able to change the tire and, deal with the flat and that kind of thing. But then more than that, I found that I really wanted to be able to tailor my own bike fit. And I wanted to be able to create the platform on the bike that was going to suit me. And you go into a bike store and they spend half an hour kind of, fitting you and sizing up. And then they send you out the door. And it's kind of like, well, I kind of want more than that. I want to really dial this down to do the best I can. And so I decided to just take ownership on the whole thing and just start building the bike right from scratch. So I ordered a frame and just piece by piece. It took me all winter, but I built one bike, and then the next winter I built another bike, and then the next winter I built another bike. So it it was fun. It was a challenge, and it was a precision oriented thing again. And but it's beautiful. It's fun when you put all that work in, and then when you see the finished product, and you think, wow, that's so cool. I did that. It's a fun thing.
Speaking of open water swimming, and also you and your wife's interest in your lives and raising money for charity, you have the story
Yeah.
around swimming somewhere near Mackinac and tugging a boat while you were doing it. I'd love to hear more about that.
Well, I swim with a lot of different two different masters groups in swimming, and so I know a lot of adult swimmers like myself who used to swim in college. They're still pretty good. Of course, not as good as they used to be, but they're still pretty good. And we were all trying to stay in shape, and some people still race. And so through this group, I was invited to participate in a fundraising effort, and this was set up by a guy who grew up in Flint, Michigan. And as you remember from a couple of years ago, they had that water crisis in Flint, Michigan, where all these kids unfortunately got lead poisoning, and it was a real kind of tragedy. And so he set up a fundraising effort, and the idea was we would tow a dive boat, a 50-foot dive boat, 5 miles across the Straits of it's Mackinac or Mackinac. And with this guy, the fundraiser, who was a piano player, and so his piano was on the boat, and he played the piano, intermittently as we towed it across the Mackinac Strait. And there's 9 of us, and we were tethered to the boat by ropes, and it took us 7 hours. It initially it looked like it was only gonna. Sorry about the beeps there. Initially, it was looking like it was only going to take us like 3 hours, but then the currents came and the wind came, and I tell you, a 50-foot dive boat really catches the
Wind.
wind. And I mean, there were 2 hours. I don't think we moved at all.
Wow.
And so it was tough, and it was cold. And when you're in the middle there, the land looks pretty far away. But anyway, we did it, and we raised $100,000, which was pretty cool.
How
Yeah.
long were you in the water yourself? Were you all in the water the entire 7 hours?
No, I was in the water myself probably about
Okay.
3 or so. We went in a half-hour intervals,
Okay.
and so I swam, and then we'd switch out, and someone else would swim, and after about 2 hours, I was exhausted. I mean, towing that boat was hard. And also I was cold. I was really cold because the water was about 60, 65. And now we were wearing wetsuits, but still 2 hours in there, I was getting cold. So I was just exhausted. But the problem was we hadn't made it across. and we weren't gonna do this thing and not finish, right?
Right.
So finally, we were like, and I really thought I was done, but finally it was like we have to have a push. So we all got in with ropes attached to us, and we just swam for another hour straight, and finally made it across. Yeah, it was. It's not something I want to do every year. I can tell you that. It was fun. It was an adventure, but it was exhausting. Yeah.
That's a great story. So you've talked about your wife, who's a radiologist, Kate. She specializes in radiology around breast cancer. I got to guess.
Yeah.
I mean, you said she's now working at this full time. The kids are getting a little older. How does the work she does inspire you?
Um, well, it's interesting. I don't, frankly, she's so specialized in breast radiology that I don't understand what she's doing. I mean, she'll write a paper and she'll say, Lou, you've written a bunch of papers. Can you take a look at this? And I can read it, and I'm like, hey, like I can't understand this. I don't know. I'm not a radiologist. I don't know your jargon. So, but what she does inspire me, she's very involved in teaching, and she just loves teaching. The medical students, the residents, and she really embraces it. And it's refreshing to see somebody so passionate about what they're doing and just caring so much about it. It kind of makes me remember, how I felt, in the very beginning, and how how young and fresh people can be, and also it's funny when the young students, because they come to our house, or we'll take them on out to dinner and that kind of thing. They're so first of all, they're so intelligent, and they're so they're just they have all these dreams and aspirations, but they're also so naive, and it's fun, it's kind of fun to see them with these with all this potential, and yet they haven't formed any opinions yet. It's a kind of exciting, and to see my wife participating in helping them, guiding them, and supporting them, because it's funny, when I was in school, and I'm sure when you're in school too, there was no support groups to help us. So let's say somebody's depressed because they're not doing well, or their parent died, or maybe they're just homesick. There was nobody to talk to about that. But now, at least in my wife's case, that she fills that role too, kind of like their support group. So it's kind of, I don't know. I find it um, uh, I find it sort of I guess admirable. And I'm proud of her to see her do it.
Now you have three teenage children. Are they experiencing any interest in what they want to do in life, or are they happy enough getting through their schooling and enjoying the things you do as a family?
I think my kids are in a tough spot, frankly. With myself being a physician, my wife being a physician, and both of us really being, very focused on our careers and very focused on doing a good job. For both my wife and I, it's not enough just to do what we do. We have to do it well. We just own it. We own our jobs, and our kids see that, and so I know that they are all thinking about a career in healthcare, and some type of professional. You got to be careful, of course, leaning on your kids too much. I don't want them to feel like they've disappointed us or failed. At the same time, I do really believe that being a professional of any sort is a great thing in life. You always have that to fall back on. Nobody can ever take it away from you. When I was a teenager, my father was a businessman, fairly successful businessman, but he worked for a big corporation, and he ended up getting fired, and it was devastating to him. He got other jobs and he did fine, but I saw that when I was a teenager, and I thought, I don't want anyone to ever fire me. I want to make sure that I always have something, a shingle, so that I can always go somewhere else and do my thing. And I feel the same thing for my kids. I think having that professional certification doesn't have to be MD. It could be an OD. It could be really any type of professional. But I do believe, and particularly for my daughter, I really feel that women need to have a method of supporting themselves, so they have a way of being independent in life. I don't want my daughter to be dependent on a man, and just the way my wife's not dependent on me. I feel strongly about that, because I really feel that women need to be strong, and they need to be empowered if they're going to be able to do well in life, and stand up for themselves, and have their rightful place.
Well, you say they're in a tough spot, but it seems to me they're in a great spot. You both seem to be incredible role models, and I'm sure that'll serve them well. And I know they'll find some way of serving people in some way, given what you've done to inspire them. Let's shift to the TLC story a little bit. It had to be 1996 or so when myself and some Wisconsin and Michigan optometrists were working with TLC to establish a presence in the U.S. The late Dennis Kennedy, I think, was in the Detroit area. The late and my partner Vic Connors was impassioned about
Yeah,
bringing laser to Madison, Wisconsin, and TLC supported that. TLC founder Jeff Bashat was becoming very busy at that center in Windsor, and in those
yeah,
early years, you got involved. I can remember a
yeah,
story about a patient who ended up in Windsor, and they said, "Well, the patient's going to see Dr. Probst," and I said, "No, the patient needs to see Dr. Bashat," and it took exactly one interaction for me to understand that you had this precise patient caring approach. When you were in those early years establishing TLC, both in Windsor as it was growing and also in its first spots in the US, what was it like to be along for that ride?
it was really a special time, and I was just blessed and so lucky to be part of it. I mean, all the stars aligned. It was truly, it was a once in a lifetime opportunity, and I was able to capitalize on it, and it just turned out far better than I could ever imagine. I finished my fellowship at the University of Minnesota with Ed Holland, who's now probably the most famous corneal surgeon in the world. But even at that time, he's a great man, still a good friend of mine. And I had to come back to Canada because my visa requirements, made required me to go back. So I go back to Canada, and at that moment, laser vision correction was exploding in Canada, and it hadn't been approved in the U.S. And interestingly enough, I don't want to digress too much, but I met Jeff during my fellowship because my wife, one of her friends, was getting married in Windsor, and so she said, "Well, we have to go back to this wedding in Windsor." And I said, "What do you mean we? Have fun. I'm doing a fellowship, And she goes, "No, you're coming with me." And we weren't married at the time, and this was kind of news to me that I had suddenly had to participate in this. So I was like, okay. So I came with my $100 suit and my topsiders to go to this wedding. And my wife was the maid of honor, so she was all involved in all this stuff, and I wasn't doing anything. So I was at my wife's parents' house, and they said, "I found this. We passed these people in the mall, and they're handing out these pamphlets about this laser center." And I picked up this pamphlet, and I was like, I've never heard anything about this before. But I'm just sitting at her parents' house. I had nothing to do. So I said, "Do you think you could drive me over there?" And so I drove over there, and Jeff was there, and Jeff Michaud was there, and he was patients everywhere. And so I ended up meeting him, and I wrote him a letter in my fellowship that said, "I think I might be able to work with you." And later on in the fellowship, he called me up and he said, "When can you start?" And that's how I started with TLC. I joined Jeff. And the funny thing is, Scott, is now I'm on a committee. It's called the Physician Leadership Committee for the group, the laser company group that now controls TLC. And Jeff's on that committee too. I'm working with Jeff again. 25 years later, Jeff and I are now back, right where we were 25 years ago, talking things over. It's amazing how, in this world of ours, things come full circle, it seems.
That center was incredibly busy, but it was, going back to this word, precise. There was a clear operational model. It was full of technology. And I don't mean to say this the wrong way, but Windsor doesn't strike me as a place where that's what's expected of Windsor, right? It's a little more hardworking. And so you had patients, obviously, that were flocking there from Canada, right? Canadians, but also coming across to the US. What kind of activities did you try to use to optimize the workflow there? Because when you got there, it was already busy and you made it more busy. How did you do that?
Well, I got to give credit to Jeff, really. I mean, Jeff's the one who started the center. He had the vision, and I just plugged myself in. I was like a sponge. I mean, the way I looked at it was, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And I'm just going to learn everything I can about this. And then, if I can see ways of improving it, I'll do that. Right. But Jeff had it all sorted out, and he's such a smart guy. And I learned so much. I already learned so much from my other teachers. But then Jeff just showed me a whole other world in terms of what to do. So I just plugged into Jeff's situation, and you're right, Windsor. You seem to know Windsor a lot better than most people. It is a very working class, and it was basically at that time known for casinos, strip joints, and laser centers. And the reason is because it's so easy to cross the border. You can fly into Detroit Airport and be across the border in Canada in less than 30 minutes. And so it's it's extremely, I think it might be the world's busiest border crossing. And it's so easy to get across. So now, of course, that changed with 9/11 and other things. The border became more difficult. But we really were set up to treat Americans because the laser wasn't approved in the States yet. And then later on, we were set up to treat Americans with technology that was more advanced than the technology that was approved in the States. So that kind of advantage went on for about 5 to 8 years. And then that window kind of closed. Finally, the technology in the US caught up. And then there really wasn't a big reason for Americans to go to Canada anymore.
Well, as the National Medical Director of TLC to this day, you've been really active, if not taking the key role in helping establish this incredible relationship that that company has with optometrists in the form of co-management. Why does that model work so well?
Well, it's a system of checks and balances, and that's what I think really is the key to it. If you have a laser center that, let's say, does not co-manage, then it's driven by direct marketing. That center would advertise, and they may advertise the technology, the surgeon, or the price, but there's no real checks and balances. The patient comes in, they get treated, they leave, and I suppose now with social media, that would be the main way that a consumer could sort of evaluate that center, look on social media. But if you're co-managing, and the way I look at it is every single one of my patients is being evaluated by another doctor after that procedure. So, you have a patient, they say, hey, Dr. Jens, who should I go to for LASIK? You say, well, you should see Dr. Probst at TLC. They go to see me, they come back and you say, well, how was it? And they say, it was fantastic. And you're like, great. And you look at their eye and you're like, okay, that's beautiful work. And you tell them that, and then that's kind of made sure that the patient's got the ideal treatment. Now, conversely, let's say it doesn't happen that way. Let's say some of those pieces are missing. Maybe they have some complaints about the way they're treated. Well, you might think twice about whether you're going to send the next patient to me, or at the very least, you might give me a call and say, hey, what's going on over there? And, give us a little, kick in the butt to, maybe, get back on, our program back in order. And similarly, if the results aren't as good, that's going to, eventually reflect on who you send your patients to. So I think it really works out for the patient because it ensures quality of care and it keeps everyone honest. And it really does, because I'll tell you something, Scott. I actually now, the lasers we use now have a slit lamp right on them. And so I do, once I finish the LASIK case, I take the slit lamp and I scan the corneas, and even if I see like anything, like just a tiny speck, and even if it's peripheral, I know it will never affect the vision, never make any difference to the patient at all. I still can't bear the thought of that speck going back to the referring doctor and having them looking at that the next day and going, thinking to themselves, well, it's beautiful and the patient's seeing 20/20, but there is a little speck, little, and so I think of that every single case. And I don't, of course, I'm looking for a good surgical result. I'm looking for a good visual result, but I also want that referring doctor I always want that referring doctor to look at that eye and go, that's beautiful, and maybe that's a little superficial, but
No.
it's that's the influence the co-managing relationship has on me. It makes me want to perform to the highest level all the time, because I really feel almost like I have to.
Well, I can tell you that I just saw my brother Eric for his, general examination. You did his over -10 LASIK. It has to be at least 20 years ago now. And,
Wow.
the other thing is that is almost your signature, right, on the cornea. And so I think it's not superficial to think about how what you leave there is what that other doctor sees all the time. It's a measure of your signature of your work, and he's ecstatic and thrilled to this day, and as are all these 125,000 patients you've seen. Back to the optometry co-management part. You like to say, and you do it very well, that when you do refractive surgery, it's all you do, and that it makes you really good at it. We talked earlier about that's the precision aspect of ophthalmology, is the repetitiveness of it, and the want to get every case right down to the nano. When optometry does this checks and balances thing, it also provides patient care value. And I know you find that to be useful. How have you benefited from working with optometrists in the co-management of these patients, both before in qualifying and screening patients, and after in assessing these patients on whom you've left that signature mark of an outcome?
Well, again, if you kind of go back to comparing it to, let's say, what would be like if you're not co-managing, a patient comes in, you do their correction and they leave. You don't really have any insight into that patient at all. Whereas when an optometrist refers a patient, that's your patient you're referring. I mean, you often have seen that patient for years. You know that patient, and so you might refer the patient but you might kind of include a note, something to the effect of, that this patient has these concerns, and we might want to just take this one step at a time, or similarly, you know, that you've done this patient's family, and so there's those kind of details there, and then so that's helpful because it helps me kind of tailor my response. The patients they come with a history. They're not just another person who's shown up, and I don't really know them very well. And then further in follow up, similarly, although most people do very well, and it's not any real challenges. There's some people that they get themselves concerned about, why is one eye seem to be a little better than the other, or what, one eye's a little dry, or the sort of ongoing co-managing relationship allows you to kind of help that patient, and they're going to trust you because they've known you for a lot longer than they've known us and known me, and so you can provide that sort of support for those people. And finally, if there's ever an issue, let's say there's somebody who has any sort of significant problem, then we can work together to kind of work through it. Let's say somebody, despite all our counseling, they're presbyopic and they're surprised they need reading glasses afterwards. Unfortunately, how we go through this with everybody ad nauseum, but
Right.
there always is somebody like once every 2 or 3 years, and they come back and you're like, really? Like, you're really doing this? But anyway, but then we can work together to try to work through that and try to, sort out what's the best answer to make them happy. So, it's all about taking care of the patients, and it's all about relationships. And I find the team approach is so much stronger than if you're just going alone.
Yeah, that's really well said. I mean, optometrists pride themselves on being this frontline, if you will, PCP like eye care provider, where it is relationship management and referring to good sources and working together in partnership with good sources for surgical care. And you embrace that. And in many places, it's okay. The patient still, it works out that they get a surgery from somebody who isn't tightly related to the optometrist. But this model, maybe you and I are biased because we've done this for so long, including together. But I would want anybody who's listening to this to take your approach and take this as an expectation for how an ophthalmologist can feel positive about the work with an optometrist. I want to talk about your patient education manner. You are, as much as any that I worked with in my career, very willing to just sit in a relaxed fashion and have this conversation with the patient. And that must come from somewhere because it's just not the norm. I know for you, it feels like the norm, but I'm sure you've gone to healthcare appointments with family members or others where you can't believe the level of disconnect and lack of willingness. Where does your empathy and want for patient education come from?
Well, it comes honestly, it comes from the heart. But what you're talking about there, Scott, I think it's a sad breakdown of Western medicine. Is that somewhere along the line, everyone got too focused on diagnosing and treating because that's what you can bill for, and they stopped dealing with people as human beings because you can't bill for that.
Hmm.
And it's a sad breakdown, and it's really a problem with our system. Now, it's not to say that all doctors are not empathetic and kind, but I think that the fundamental issue is that doctors are not at least overtly rewarded for that. Now, how do I look at it? I'm looking at it from the perspective of how can I be the best doctor I can be, and it doesn't just mean doing a good procedure or selecting the right patients. It means treating people the way they should be treated, and the way people should be treated is with respect. And if you're getting treated better at McDonald's than you're getting treated at a medical clinic, there's something seriously wrong. And yet, the people at McDonald's can be pretty nice, and so I think it's not a real stretch for people to put forth that effort. I think but it has to be, the doctors have to make it important. It has to be considered a priority. And frankly, it is a priority for me because, when you're in the refractive surgery business, it's not a required procedure. It's entirely elective. People are spending a lot of money and they're scared. And if you're going to throw on to that, being insensitive and callous, you're basically torturing these poor people. That's just not right. But you can counteract that by actually trying to identify with them and being empathetic. And the other thing people want to see is they want to see that they can trust you, and they want to that you're confident. And you don't instill confidence in people by being rude and being abrasive. You instill confidence in them by being completely honest. And so when people, ask me questions, I tell them a completely honest answer. There's absolutely no, uh, jargon or trying to cover anything up. And people look in your eyes and they can tell. They can tell, how you feel about things, and they can tell if you're being sincere about your response. And once they see that, they're good. It really only takes 10 seconds. They look at it and they're like, I can trust this guy. And that's it. But strangely enough, nobody teaches you that in medical school. And no, and I don't know, did they teach anything like that in optometry school, Scott?
No, there's very little of that. And you put it under the auspice of practice management, which is mostly around the financial aspects of business.
Right.
Yeah.
Well,
So
they didn't even teach us that.
yeah, and I think what your point is that I take is, as a doctor, it's a responsibility. It's not just that it's an opportunity. It's really the responsibility. It's taking care of the patient. And I sense that some subspecialists are a little bit short and a little bit scientific because it's an easy way to extricate themselves from the room. In other words, I don't have to know a lot more about my hip replacement surgery than the minimum, because it's not going to change the way the doctor's going to do what they're going to do. And I'm going to have a team of people that will care for me afterward. And even if I never see the surgeon again, it's going to be what it's going to be. But sight has this quality of life matter to it. And I think you take that so seriously that you understand that the more that I comfort them now, we can lean on that information later. Even if they don't remember they'll need reading glasses in 2 years, you had the conversation. They gave them a chance to think about it. Tell me about where LASIK is today, and we've had this wait. We had this wait for laser vision correction. LASIK has made advancements in the form of the technology. Where is laser refractive surgery headed in your estimation in the next 10 years?
Well, it's interesting. I guess I hit that from several angles. Number one, the technology has improved. LASIK, is not the LASIK we do now is not the LASIK of 20 years ago. We had good results 20 years ago or 10 years ago when I did your brother's surgery, but now it's extremely accurate, and we rarely do enhancements or touch-ups anymore. And we can do larger amounts of astigmatism much more successfully than we could in the past. So the precision and the sort of reliability, the long-term results, all have improved tremendously. So LASIK has really gotten good. And just to give you an example, when I started doing LASIK in 1995 at the refractive surgery meetings, people would talk about this milestone where 50% of people would see 20/20. That was the milestone. And they were talking about that being just incredible, that you could do that. Now we're pushing above 95%. We can get, and that's all comers, even big corrections. So it's really, really improved. So the technology's improved, so that's good. Where do I see it going? The technology will continue to improve. There's always an advancement every 3 to 6 months that we refine things with, but it's getting harder. I mean, the results are so good now, it's getting harder to get it better. So patients will say to me, so what's next? Is it going to get better next year? Well, not really. I mean, it's gotten so good. It's hard to get better than perfect, and we're really butting up to perfect right now. What things have changed, though, is there is a new procedure called the SMILE procedure, where it's a flapless procedure, where a small lenticule of cornea is created and then extracted from a small incision. And the advantage of that would be there'd be no flap. And that's kind of controversial because although there's no flap, so potentially more safe, it also doesn't seem to be quite as accurate. And LASIK, as I just mentioned, has become extremely accurate. So SMILE's been around for about 10 years internationally. It's been in the States now for a few years. It hasn't really caught on. And I know some surgeons who have laser centers, and they've bought the machine, the laser that does the SMILE procedure, and they tell me they only use it for 10% of their cases. Well, to me, that tells me that it's, not really ready for prime time, but maybe that'll happen. Maybe that could happen in the next 5 years. So we'll have to wait and see. If it does, of course, I'll adjust to it. but I'm not holding my breath right now, Scott. I'll tell you that. It's just LASIK's just gotten so good, and we just we've got it so refined now. Another interesting change that's happened, Scott, is that um, back 25 years ago, everyone and their brother and their sister wanted to do LASIK, who was in the surgeon category. Everyone was involved. I mean, it just seemed like it was the new exciting thing, and that has changed dramatically in the last 25 years. All the kind of low volume mom and pop sort of providers have been driven out simply because it's such a competitive business, and the technology is extremely expensive, and the other thing is that there's sort of easier fish to catch. Cataract surgery now has a lot of options in terms of specialty lenses and charging for different ways of fragmenting the lens, with the femtosecond laser. And so there's all kinds of ways of making money with cataract surgery, and that's a lot easier than trying to compete in the laser vision market, which is just cutthroat business. So what's happened is the laser vision market has become a market of very few players. It's basically the corporate providers and then a few big centers, and that's it. So it's really weeded out all the sort of smaller providers over the last 20 years.
So you've written 6 books on LASIK. You've authored dozens of articles. Where do you get these cases to talk about? How do you write about them to your colleagues and maintain this expertise without coming across as somebody who knows it all, right? Because I think you balance that really well.
Well, I don't know it all, and most of the books I've written have been collaborative efforts. So what I've served as editor, and then the author of, let's say, 50% of the book, but the rest of it I try to collaborate, and I try to get people who have something to contribute in those areas. Let's say there's a expert in corneal topography, or someone who's an expert in one particular aspect of the procedure. Well, I try to recruit that person to write that chapter and try to create the book of the best value to the reader. And but I think that's always a danger in life. You never want to come across as condescending, because nobody likes that. And so really what all the books I did weren't designed to show everyone how great I was. It was really designed to try to represent the procedure the best way I possibly could. I was always trying to be as absolutely educational and thorough as possible. And what I wanted to do was just make the best book I possibly could make. It had really nothing to, a side benefit, of course, is my name's on the front of it. So hopefully that would reflect on me to some degree. But I wasn't at all trying to ever talk down to my audience, because my audience are my colleagues, right? And how can you talk down to your colleagues? We're all doctors. We're all just trying to learn, and everyone's got something to contribute. So that's kind of always was my approach.
So back to this precision part of life, you ended up taking on car remodeling and home remodeling. Tell me a little bit about how this perfectionism and precision approach to life has affected you in your downtime. That's really fascinating.
Well, what I've discovered is, even though I'm a surgeon, and I do some cerebral kind of things too, writing books and papers, and I really like working on mechanical tasks. I derive a tremendous amount of pleasure in it, and I can lose myself in these things for hours. And sometimes, like when I was, I rebuilt a Gatsby kit car that was a barn find, that the motor was, been sitting there for 20 years. And I'd be working on that, or I rebuilt a 69 Mustang and then a 59 Corvette. Sometimes my wife would come in the garage. She'd have to drag me out of there because it'd be 1 a.m. And I just completely lose sense of time, because it's sort of hypnotic. It's mesmerizing. And it's not that it's rocket science, but it's just intriguing, seeing how all the things go together, and then working at it and figuring it out, and then putting it together, and then finally getting it exactly the way you want it. I find it. I really enjoy it. And it's funny, Scott, I really enjoy it, but I enjoy it for a fixed period of time, like somewhere between 2 to 4 hours. After that, I've had it. I'm done. I don't need to do that anymore. So I wouldn't want to do this as a full time job. I wouldn't want to be an auto mechanic. It's too much in the trenches, and I don't think I have any hands left, and it's too hard, frankly. It's
It is
hard
hard,
stuff.
man.
But doing some of these projects, just a few hours a day, I find it's really good for my peace of mind because it just allows me to kind of go into a different space and just work on a problem and not trouble my mind with anything else.
Let me ask you for a last point of view. Give some advice to predominantly the optometry industry listeners to this podcast on what you'd advise them to do in guiding their patients around the options for them to see the best.
Well, yeah, I think you know this pretty much as well as I do, Scott, and it's to really scrutinize who the providers are in your area, and take a real critical look at them. And that's your right to take a critical look at the providers in your area, and then and give them an honest assessment. Don't just send your patients to whoever everyone else does, and don't just send your patients to who's convenient. You want to send the patients to someone who's going to treat them with respect and give them good surgical results and treat you with respect. The referring doctor. Those are all very important pieces of the puzzle. If those pieces aren't there, then there's something not right. That system's broken, and you need to look for alternatives. And that's kind of your responsibility as a provider. If you're going to refer patients, you need to find the good providers. But the thing is, as you know, optometry is a very tight group, and so just talking to your colleagues, it shouldn't be too hard to sort out who's the best provider for refractive surgery or cataract surgery or retina. But I think that my main message would be, and this is something I don't think that maybe some optometrists understand, is you're the ones in control. You're not helpless here by any means because you're the gatekeeper. You're the ones with all the patients, and the surgeons, they want all those patients. So you can control how that patient is treated. You can control how you're treated, and in many ways, you can, obviously control the result of the surgery too if you pick the right surgeon. So, rather than feeling like you're just a piece of the puzzle, you're actually the integral piece of the puzzle because you're the gatekeeper, and you're in the position of power. And I don't think that necessarily it's always perceived that way.
I feel very fortunate having practiced in Madison, Wisconsin with cataract, retina, refractive surgeon partners that really wanted to meet me in that process. And I always wondered how my colleagues in other parts of the country did it. And I'm assuming that many listeners feel that they have good relationships, but you made a very important point. And it's not about the optometrist controlling it in the form of, sort of being inappropriate about the control, but doing the research and being honest in the assessment of what's going on and expecting a collaborative, respectful approach, doctor to doctor, even when the optometrist is not at the surgeon's level of surgical expertise. They have that relationship and they have that very important sense of how the patient should be treated. And when that goes well, it goes really well. And I can't thank you enough for all the patients. And it's not done. I got more to come, but in the meantime, it's just been a thrill to tell your story. And thank you so much for giving me some of your time today, Lou. I appreciate it sincerely.
Well, thank you, Scott, and thanks for inviting me. It's been fun.
Yep. And for the audience, as always, I really appreciate that you've listened and watched to this Sandbox story. Until my next Sandbox story, be great at all you do.